Ever feel like you're stuck in that gap?
Mm.
The one between what you should be doing to reach your goals, hitting the gym, eating right, finally launching that side hustle, and what you're actually doing, which often is a lot like, well, not that.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very human space to inhabit, I think. We all have these aspirations, and the path forward often seems pretty clear.
Right.
The real challenge lies in consistently putting one foot in front of the other. That's where things tend to, well, fall apart sometimes.
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of self-discipline comes into play.
Hmm.
It's often talked about as this superpower that unlocks personal fulfillment and turns those someday dreams into today realities. We've been digging deep into a book called The Power of Discipline to really get a handle on this.
And it's astonishing how often our best intentions just evaporate. Think about New Year's resolutions.
Oh, yeah.
Scranton psychology professor John C. Norcross found that less than 10% of them actually stick.
Less than 10%. Wow.
That massive drop-off, a lot of it apparently comes down to a lack of self-discipline.
That's a real wake-up call. So our mission today is to really explore self-discipline in a way that's, useful. We want to understand its core. What are the common obstacles that derail us? And most importantly, what are some concrete, actionable strategies we can use to build it in our own lives? We're pulling all of this straight from our source material.
Yeah, and we're not just looking at the what of self-discipline, but also the why behind those struggles. Like, why is it so tough to consistently do what we know is good for us? And then the crucial part, that how do we make these positive shifts stick for the long haul?
Absolutely. And the power of discipline covers so much ground, it seems, from the biological factors that influence our self-control
Right.
to the ancient wisdom of Zen philosophy and really practical techniques for building those day-to-day habits.
They're quite comprehensive.
Okay, so the book kicks off by looking at the biology of self-discipline. It's not just some abstract mental game we're playing with ourselves, right?
Yeah, that's right. The book really emphasizes that self-discipline isn't purely about willpower. There's a significant biological element involved. It brings up the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment from way back in 1972.
The marshmallow test.
Yeah, and then the follow-up study in 2011, which offered some really eye-opening insights.
The one where kids had that tough choice. One marshmallow right now, or wait a bit and get two. What did that tell us about our biology and ability to resist temptation?
Well, the later studies connected the ability to hold off on that immediate treat to increased activity in the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain involved in things like planning and making decisions.
Okay.
And interestingly, they also saw differences in the ventral striatum, which is linked to our reward system and even addiction, when these individuals were making choices between healthier and less healthy options later in life.
So those who could resist the marshmallow actually had different brain activity going on. That's a pretty fundamental insight.
It seems so.
And it wasn't just about marshmallows, right? Those kids seem to fare better in other areas of life, too.
Exactly. The research indicated that the kids who were able to delay gratification early on tended to be more successful in various aspects of their lives as they grew up. It suggested that, well, even a seemingly simple childhood choice could give us a glimpse into lifelong patterns of decision-making and self-control.
Fascinating. The book also delves into this idea of willpower fatigue, which totally resonates. It's like after you've really had to exert yourself mentally, making even small decisions feels exhausting.
That analogy to physical tiredness is spot on. Willpower, much like a muscle, can get worn out when you've been using it a lot.
Right.
The book mentions Will Baumeister's 1996 study. Participants who had to resist tempting sweets and instead munch on radishes didn't do so well later when faced with a tricky puzzle. Their self-control muscle had basically been depleted by that initial act of resistance.
So constantly having to say no to those little temptations actually makes it harder to say no to bigger things later. That totally explains those days where my good intentions just seem to vanish by lunchtime.
It really does. And the book also highlights how stress impacts our ability to be disciplined. When we're under stress, our bodies shift into that fight or flight mode.
And when that happens, our brains aren't exactly prioritizing long-term goals, are they? It's all about immediate survival.
Precisely. Stress essentially impairs the prefrontal cortex, making us more impulsive and focused on those immediate short-term fixes rather than those well-thought-out decisions that align with our bigger picture.
Okay, so with all these biological factors at play, what's the core message about discipline itself that the book really wants us to take away?
Well, the book boils it down to a pretty straightforward principle. As adults with our wits about us, we generally know the difference between right and wrong, or at least between what we should do and what we want to do in the moment.
Mhm.
Discipline, at its core, is about consistently doing what we know we need to do, even when we really don't feel like it. It's that consistent action, day after day, that builds momentum and transforms those aspirations into tangible results.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So now that we have a better understanding of some of the biological forces at work, let's talk about the good stuff. What are the actual benefits we can expect to see in our lives when we start to cultivate more self-discipline?
Oh, the positive ripple effects are significant and touch many areas of life. One key benefit the book emphasizes is a real boost in self-confidence.
Yeah.
When we consistently act in line with our goals, we start to see tangible progress.
And that feeling of accomplishment must be a powerful way to counteract that nagging sense of worthlessness that can creep in when we're constantly falling short of our own expectations.
Definitely.
The book uses the example of wanting to lose weight, but never actually taking those first steps.
Exactly. Inactivity and repeated failure chip away at our self-esteem. On the flip side, self-discipline empowers us to achieve those goals, fostering a strong sense of competence and self-worth.
That makes sense.
Another interesting point the book makes is that people who are self-disciplined tend to be less easily offended.
That's a surprising one. Why would that be the case?
Well, I think it's because they have a more solid sense of self and a clearer understanding of their own values.
Okay.
They're less likely to take constructive criticism as a personal attack and more likely to see it as valuable information that can help them grow. Their self-worth isn't as reliant on external approval.
That's a powerful benefit right there, having
Mhm.
that inner resilience. What other positive outcomes are linked to having more self-discipline?
The book also highlights its crucial role in avoiding risky behaviors.
Oh.
It mentions Hershey's and Gottfried's self-control theory, which suggests that a lack of self-control is a significant factor in things like criminal behavior. Well, it's not the only factor, of course. The ability to manage impulses definitely plays a part.
That makes sense. When you think about it, a lot of risky behaviors stem from not being able to resist those immediate urges.
Precisely. The book cites a 2012 study by Ford and Blumenstein, which found that college students who showed high levels of self-control were less likely to engage in things like abusing prescription medication, binge drinking, using cannabis,
Right.
and even impulsive sexual behavior.
So it's not just about achieving those big life goals. It's about living a safer, healthier, and ultimately more fulfilling life across the board. Now, we all know that making changes, even positive ones, can be really challenging. The book explores this with the concept of the status quo bias. What exactly is this bias?
The status quo bias is essentially this innate preference we have for things to stay the same, even if there are potentially better options out there. It's that invisible pull that makes us resistant to stepping outside of what's familiar and comfortable.
it's like sticking with that old job you don't really enjoy, even though you see better opportunities, just because it feels familiar and less risky.
Exactly. And a big reason behind this bias is something called loss aversion theory.
Long aversion.
Yeah, the idea here is that we feel the pain of losing something much more intensely than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. So even if a change promises a bigger reward, the fear of losing what we currently have can really hold us back.
That rings true. That fear of the unknown can be a real obstacle. The book also touches on the fear of regret.
Yes, the worry about making a change and then regretting it later is another powerful factor. We might be concerned about what others will think if things don't work out.
Right.
So we often stick with what feels safe and predictable, even if it's not truly serving our best interests.
It's like staying in a relationship that isn't great because you're afraid of being alone or facing judgment if you end it.
Precisely. And then there's the mere exposure effect. How would you explain that concept?
From what I understood, it's basically that the more we're exposed to something, the more we tend to like or accept it. So we stick with those old routines and beliefs simply because they're familiar, even if they're not the most effective.
That's a great way to put it. It can definitely keep us in those well-worn ruts. But the good news is that this effect can also work in our favor.
Oh, so?
As we consistently practice self-discipline and develop better habits, those new behaviors become more familiar and comfortable,
Good.
which in turn makes it less likely that we'll revert to our old ways. Self-control can become the new normal.
That's a hopeful thought. So how do we actually start to challenge this status quo bias and break free from those comfortable but potentially limiting patterns?
Yeah.
The book mentions a thought evaluation exercise.
Yes, this is a really practical technique to help us make more rational decisions. It involves taking some time to think through the situation and literally listing out the pros and cons.
Like a list.
Exactly. The book suggests dividing a piece of paper into 4 sections: the advantages of sticking with the status quo, the disadvantages of the status quo, the advantages of making a change, and the disadvantages of making that change.
So really laying it all out, the good and the bad, of both staying the same and taking a leap.
Precisely. The book recommends spending at least 10 minutes on this, revisiting it the next day, and maybe even talking it over with someone you trust to get an outside perspective.
Good idea.
And make sure you haven't overlooked anything. The key is to try and step back from the emotional aspect as much as possible and evaluate things logically.
That sounds like a really useful way to gain some clarity and question those deeply ingrained biases. Now, another interesting point the book raises is about getting a realistic perspective, particularly through the lens of the Dunning-Kruger effect. What exactly is that?
Ah, the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a fascinating cognitive bias where people who don't have much knowledge or skill in a particular area tend to overestimate their own competence.
Right.
They simply don't know enough to realize how much they don't know.
Ah, yes. It's that phenomenon where the least skilled people often think they're the best, while those who are actually more knowledgeable tend to be more aware of their limitations.
Precisely. The book points out this interesting paradox. As we gain more experience and expertise in something, our own assessment of our abilities often becomes more humble.
Mm.
The more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
So how does this relate back to self-discipline?
Well, it highlights the importance of continuous self-development and staying open to feedback. If we overestimate our abilities, we might not see the need for improvement or be receptive to constructive criticism.
Mm.
And that can really hinder our progress and our ability to be disciplined in our pursuit of growth. The key insight here, I think, is to actively seek feedback and cultivate intellectual humility. Regularly asking, "What am I missing?" can counteract this bias.
The book offers a solution, right?
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between having confidence and being willing to learn.
Exactly. It emphasizes striking that balance between trusting in your strengths and being open to constructive feedback. The example of a really skilled driver taking an advanced driving course is a great illustration. Even with their existing abilities, they need to be open to the idea that there's always room to improve.
So it's about having that humility to acknowledge that we don't know everything and to continuously strive to get better. Now let's move on to the really practical stuff. The book dedicates a whole section to building daily habits to boost self-discipline. This feels like the real meat of the matter.
It really is. The book really underscores that the difference between those who achieve their goals and those who don't often boils down to their daily habits and routines.
Mhm.
Highly successful people tend to have structured routines that support their overall well-being, mentally, physically, and even spiritually.
And it really emphasizes the importance of a consistent morning routine in setting a positive tone for the entire day. It even contrasts hitting that snooze button with the morning habits of people like Barack Obama, Bill Gates, and Oprah Winfrey.
Yes, those examples really highlight a common thread. Often, highly effective individuals start their day with intention, incorporating activities like exercise, healthy eating, reading, or mindfulness before their actual workday even begins.
Right.
This creates a powerful foundation of energy and positivity.
The book also talks about the significance of that final hour of the day. It's not just about how you kick things off, but how you wind down as well.
That's right. A consistent evening routine that promotes relaxation, like disconnecting from screens and maybe reading a physical book, is absolutely crucial for preparing for restful sleep,
Sleep, so important.
which, as we know, is fundamental for both our physical and mental recovery. The book recommends aiming for at least 7 hours of quality sleep each night.
And beyond these bookends of the day, what other daily habits does the book highlight as being particularly effective for boosting self-discipline?
Practicing gratitude is a significant one.
Gratitude, interesting.
Yeah, the book references a 2016 study that actually linked feelings of gratitude with increased self-control. Simple practices like consciously saying thank you or taking a few moments each day to reflect on and even write down things you're grateful for can really strengthen your ability to delay gratification and exercise self-control.
That's a powerful connection. Gratitude actually fueling our self-control.
Yeah.
It definitely shifts your focus to the positive. The book also emphasizes the importance of setting daily goals.
Absolutely. Breaking down those big long-term aspirations into smaller, more manageable daily goals creates a sense of momentum and makes those seemingly huge dreams feel less overwhelming.
Right.
The book's example of wanting to lose 60 pounds and breaking that down into smaller monthly and weekly targets really illustrates this perfectly.
It's all about taking those consistent, small steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
And getting enough quality sleep is also non-negotiable, right?
Absolutely essential. The book provides several helpful tips for improving your sleep habits, like trying to avoid daytime naps, limiting stimulants, and heavy meals close to bedtime. Establishing a relaxing bedtime routine and making sure your sleep environment is conducive to rest. Quality sleep has a direct impact on our energy levels, our mood, and our ability to focus and stay disciplined throughout the day.
And maybe a slightly less obvious one. The book talks about the importance of staying organized. How does being organized actually tie into self-discipline?
Well, the book argues that organization and self-discipline really go hand in hand. Being organized helps to reduce chaos, improves your productivity by cutting down on time spent searching for things,
Oh.
lowers your overall stress levels, and can even boost your energy and enthusiasm. It's about creating an external environment that supports your goals rather than constantly working against you.
It's like setting yourself up for success by having everything in its place and readily accessible. The book also specifically points out two key habits to try and incorporate before 8 a.m. prayer or meditation and spending some time reading. Let's dive into those a little deeper.
Yes, the book highlights how many successful individuals across various fields incorporate some form of prayer or meditation into their morning routine. Research has shown that mindfulness practices can be very effective for reducing stress, improving focus and memory, and even fostering creativity.
Hmm.
It provides a dedicated moment for quiet reflection and can really help center you before the demands of the day begin.
And the second habit is making time for reading. It's striking how often really accomplished people emphasize the value of continuous learning.
Absolutely. The book even mentions how people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have expressed a desire to be able to speed read, underscoring the immense value they place on acquiring knowledge.
Wow.
Continuous learning and personal development are fundamental for growth, and reading, whether it's physical books or audiobooks, is a really powerful way to achieve that. The book contrasts this with more passive and less enriching ways we might spend our time.
So these daily habits create a really strong foundation for self-discipline. Now, what about actually building those better habits in the first place? The book offers some specific techniques. It mentions strategies used by the Navy SEALs, like the 40% rule. What's the thinking behind that?
The 40% rule is a really interesting mental toughness technique. It suggests that when we feel like we've hit our absolute limit, like we can't possibly go on,
Yeah.
we've actually only used about 40% of our true capacity.
Only 40%. Seriously?
Apparently so. By consciously pushing past that perceived point of exhaustion, we can tap into our reserve potential and build significant mental resilience. It's about recognizing that the internal voice telling you to quit often comes way before you're truly physically or mentally spent.
That's a powerful mindset shift, realizing you likely have so much more in the tank than you think. The book also discusses something called the 10x rule.
The 10x rule encourages setting goals that are 10 times bigger than what you might initially consider possible.
10 times. That sounds intense.
It is, but the idea is that by aiming significantly higher, you'll naturally take more action and strengthen your discipline along the way. It really challenges that tendency we might have to set smaller, more easily achievable goals out of a fear of failure.
It's about raising your own bar and pushing yourself way beyond your comfort zone. And then there's the 10-minute rule, which sounds pretty intriguing.
The 10-minute rule is a clever little strategy for helping you overcome those impulsive decisions and strengthen your self-control. It actually references a Harvard University study that compared how humans and chimpanzees make decisions about immediate versus delayed rewards.
Okay.
Interestingly, despite our more complex brains, we humans sometimes overthink things and choose that smaller immediate reward over a larger one that requires a bit of waiting.
So how does this 10-minute rule help us navigate that?
It's simple. When you feel that strong urge to do something that you know will derail your goals, whether it's giving in to a craving or skipping a workout, you deliberately pause for 10 minutes.
Just stop for 10 minutes.
Yeah. After that 10-minute break, you then reevaluate how you feel. Often, the intensity of that initial urge will have diminished, making it easier to make a more rational choice. And even if you do still choose to indulge, the very act of waiting those 10 minutes helps to strengthen your ability to delay gratification over time.
It's like creating a little speed bump between the impulse and the action, giving yourself a chance to think things through. Now, even with all these great strategies, we know that things can still get in the way of our discipline. The book discusses some common obstacles. Parkinson's law is one of them. What exactly is that?
Parkinson's law. It basically states that work expands to fill the time that's available for its completion.
Right, I've heard of that.
So if you give yourself a whole week to complete a task that could realistically be done in a single day, chances are it will indeed take you the entire week.
Guilty as charged sometimes.
We all are. The book suggests actively counteracting procrastination, which often stems from this law, by setting yourself tight and realistic deadlines.
It's about creating that sense of urgency to really focus and get things done efficiently. The book also makes a clear distinction between discipline and procrastination, which seems pretty fundamental.
Yes, it emphasizes that self-discipline is fundamentally about doing what needs to be done regardless of how you might be feeling in the moment. Whereas procrastination is all about delaying action, often waiting for that elusive right time or perfect circumstances, which ultimately just leads to inaction and missed opportunities.
It's about pushing through even when that initial burst of inspiration fades. The book acknowledges that achieving significant goals requires sustained effort over the long haul, and that initial excitement isn't always going to be there.
Exactly. True success involves persevering through those periods when your motivation dips and the path ahead feels particularly challenging. It's about understanding that significant achievements rarely come without some level of sustained effort and overcoming obstacles along the way.
So simply being aware of these potential roadblocks is the first step towards navigating them. Now, the book delves into a really interesting area, cultivating comfort with discomfort. Why is this so important for building self-discipline?
Because self-discipline, by its very nature, often involves doing things that aren't necessarily easy or instantly enjoyable. It requires us to consciously override our natural tendency to take the path of least resistance.
Right, the easy way out.
Exactly. To truly build discipline, we need to gradually become more comfortable with stepping outside of our familiar comfort zones.
The book mentions Jia Jiang's TED Talk about his 100 days of rejection as a really powerful example of deliberately seeking out discomfort.
Yes, that's a great example. Jiang intentionally put himself in situations where he was likely to be rejected in order to build his resilience and overcome his fear of that negative outcome. This deliberate practice of embracing discomfort can actually build our willpower muscle and help us break free from those detrimental habits and even addictions. The book suggests that those feelings of struggle and discomfort can even be reframed as positive signs of progress.
It's about changing your perspective on those feelings, seeing them as indicators that you're actually pushing your boundaries and growing. The book also introduces this concept of urge surfing. What exactly is that?
Urge surfing, developed by psychologist Alan Marlett, is a really helpful technique for managing strong temptations and urges without trying to forcefully suppress them.
Okay.
It uses the analogy of urges being like waves that build in intensity and then eventually subside. The idea is to learn how to surf over the peak of that urge until it naturally passes.
So how do you actually go about surfing an urge? Like, what are the steps?
Well, the book outlines a few key steps. First, really pay attention to where you physically feel that urge in your body.
Okay, notice it physically.
Second, shift your focus and concentrate on those specific physical sensations. Third, spend a couple of minutes just focusing on your own breath.
Breathing, okay.
And finally, try to visualize that urge as a wave. Notice how it rises in intensity and then gradually starts to fall away.
The book explains that trying to suppress urges can often backfire and actually make them stronger, using that classic "don't think about an elephant" analogy.
Exactly. Trying to just ignore a strong urge often doesn't work in the long run. Urge surfing is about acknowledging the urge without immediately giving into it, allowing it to run its natural course.
Right.
This practice helps build your tolerance for discomfort and strengthens your self-control over time.
That sounds like a really valuable tool for navigating those immediate impulses that can so easily derail our best intentions. Now, the book shifts its focus a bit and talks about the importance of focusing on the system you have in place, rather than just the ultimate goal itself. Why is having a good system so crucial?
Well, while having clear goals is certainly important for giving you direction, it's really the daily system, the consistent processes and habits you implement that ultimately determines whether you'll achieve those goals. The book uses a great analogy of a football coach who focuses on the team's daily practice habits rather than solely on winning the championship game. Consistent effort and the right processes are what lead to the desired outcomes.
It's like saying that having a goal to lose weight is important, but it's your daily habits of eating healthy and exercising consistently that will actually get you there.
Precisely. The book makes the point that goals alone often don't lead to lasting change if your underlying habits don't also evolve.
Right.
It gives examples like tidying up a messy room. It might look great temporarily, but without developing consistent habits of organization, it will quickly become messy again.
In there.
Exactly. Similarly, losing weight through a temporary diet often leads to regaining it if those unhealthy eating habits aren't addressed in the long run.
The book introduces these three different levels of change: outcomes, processes, and identity. And it emphasizes that truly lasting success requires a shift at the level of your identity.
That's a really key insight. Focusing only on the desired outcomes or even just on implementing new processes might lead to some temporary results. But real lasting transformation happens when we shift our fundamental identity and our core belief system.
Identity change. That sounds big.
It is. The book uses the example of two people trying to quit smoking. One might say, I'm trying to give it up, which still identifies them as a smoker.
Right.
The other says, I don't smoke, indicating a much deeper change in their self-perception.
The story of Brian Clark overcoming his nail-biting habit by starting to take pride in his manicured nails really illustrates this powerful shift in identity.
It does. He moved from just trying to stop to actually embracing a new identity as someone who values and takes care of his nails. The book really emphasizes that the ultimate aim should be a fundamental lifestyle transformation rather than just achieving a series of isolated, specific goals.
Okay, that's a really powerful perspective. That lasting change comes from within, from really aligning how you see yourself with your aspirations. Now, the book takes a bit of a turn and explores how embracing principles from Zen philosophy can actually help us with our goal attainment. How can something that seems so focused on the present moment actually help us achieve future goals?
That's a great question. Zen philosophy offers a unique and often very helpful perspective on coping with challenges, reducing anxiety, and overcoming fears, all of which can significantly enhance our self-discipline when we're pursuing goals.
Okay.
Interestingly, research at Penn State University has even highlighted the tangible benefits of Zen practices like meditation for reducing stress and improving our decision-making abilities.
The book explains that Zen, unlike a traditional religion, is more of a practical life philosophy rooted in the teachings of Buddha, with a core emphasis on truly living in the present moment and understanding the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. A key concept in Zen is letting go of that rigid idea of a separate, fixed self and recognizing our interconnectedness with the world around us. This shift in perspective can actually reduce a lot of the stress and fear that we might experience when we're trying to maintain a particular self-image, like the image of a high achiever, which the book touches upon.
So how do these core Zen principles specifically aid us in developing greater self-discipline?
Well, the book highlights several key ways. First, by helping us to accept that suffering and challenges are a natural and unavoidable part of life's journey.
Acceptance of suffering.
Second, by teaching us how to control our minds by focusing on the present moment rather than constantly dwelling on past regrets or future worries. And third, by helping us to overcome fear by not getting fixated on negative potential outcomes. By cultivating a calmer and more present state of mind, we become less reactive to impulsive urges and better equipped to pursue our goals with sustained discipline. The Zen principle of accepting suffering can help us view setbacks in our discipline routines not as failures, but as natural parts of the process, making us more resilient.
It's interesting that the book clarifies that Zen isn't actually against setting and achieving goals, even referencing Buddha's Eightfold Path, which includes proactive guidelines and goals for living a fulfilling life.
That's a really important distinction. Zen actually encourages intentional action, but it emphasizes doing so without becoming overly attached to specific outcomes or being consumed by fear of the future.
Right.
The book also brings in the example of Shaolin monks as incredible examples of discipline, highlighting their rigorous training and their emphasis on finding balance in their lives.
Their disciplined daily routine, which combines intense martial arts training with spiritual practices and meditation, is certainly a powerful testament to the potential of self-control. The book mentions the concept of qi and how meditation can help with emotional control and focus.
Yes, the Shaolin tradition places a strong emphasis on cultivating emotional control, often referred to as qi, for enhanced focus and overall resilience. And the book even cites scientific evidence, a study published in PNAS, that showed how even relatively short periods of meditation, just 20 minutes a day for 5 days, can lead to significant reductions in anxiety, stress, and feelings of tiredness.
20 minutes for 5 days. That's quite accessible. The book then describes a couple of basic meditation techniques, just sitting, also known as zazen, and just sitting, with a heightened sense of awareness called shikantaza.
Zazen typically involves finding a comfortable seated posture and simply maintaining awareness of your breath and any thoughts that arise without judgment. Shikantaza, or just sitting, is a slightly more advanced practice that focuses on that non-judgmental observation of thoughts as they come and go without actively engaging with them.
And for those who might find traditional seated meditation a bit challenging, the book introduces kinhin, which is Zen walking meditation.
Right, kinhin involves slow, deliberate walking with a focused awareness on each step, which can be a really effective way to cultivate self-control through mindful movement. The book recommends starting small with meditation, perhaps just 5 minutes in the morning and 5 in the evening,
Okay, start small.
and making it a non-negotiable part of your daily life.
And crucially, the book advises against trying to meditate, but instead simply doing it. This leads us perfectly into the next chapter, the power of doing over trying. Why is eliminating the word try so significant?
Well, the book argues that consciously removing the word try from your vocabulary can have a surprisingly powerful impact on your self-esteem and fundamentally transform your approach to achieving your goals.
Really, just changing one word.
It sounds simple, but trying often implies a lack of full commitment and conveniently provides an easy escape route from taking real accountability. Doing, on the other hand, signifies decisiveness and a commitment to action.
It's like trying leaves the door open for excuses if things don't work out, whereas doing really demands results. The book suggests that having a try mindset can lead to self-deception and a tendency to put in only minimal effort.
Precisely. When you say you'll try to do something, it's much harder to truly measure your level of effort. And you can easily convince yourself that you've done enough, even if you haven't actually made significant progress. Doing produces tangible results that are clear for both you and others to see.
The book strongly encourages listeners to actively become doers by cultivating a genuine trust in their own abilities, while also maintaining a realistic perspective, by taking a clear inventory of their strengths and weaknesses,
Right.
by proactively seeking help when they need it, and by committing to acquiring any necessary skills.
It's about cultivating a deep and unwavering belief in your chosen path, investing the necessary time and self-reflection to really clarify your goals, and then diligently planning those goals by writing them down before you even begin to take action.
Planning is key.
Absolutely. This helps to prevent wasted effort and avoids developing a reputation for being someone who doesn't follow through on projects.
The book explains how trying to achieve a goal, like trying to lose weight, can actually lead to negative thought patterns and a focus on the potential for failure. Whereas making a firm decision to do it fosters a much more positive vision of success. It even references Deepak Chopra's well-known principle of don't try, do.
That's right. It's all about making that fundamental shift from a mindset characterized by uncertainty and doubt to one of confident and decisive action. Now, the book moves on to explore the importance of adopting what it calls a winner's mindset. What are the key characteristics of thinking like a winner?
Well, the book advises starting with that overarching goal of reaching your full potential in life, which inherently requires both self-awareness and a significant degree of self-discipline.
Okay.
It emphasizes that life is a continuous journey of learning and growth, and that any period of stagnation ultimately leads to a loss of momentum.
It highlights that in any aspect of life, we're all constantly moving in one of two directions, either towards winning or towards losing, and that the ultimate choice of which direction we take is entirely up to us as individuals. The book then goes on to outline 5 fundamental rules for excelling in any endeavor.
Okay, what are they? The first of these rules is to take complete personal responsibility for your life, echoing that powerful quote from Jim Rohn. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself.
Exactly. Acknowledging your own role in your current situation and recognizing your inherent power to change yourself is absolutely foundational. The second rule is to have a clear and honest understanding of your own weaknesses, to identify those areas where you need to improve.
Know your weaknesses. Got it.
The third rule emphasizes the importance of being willing to make necessary sacrifices, recognizing that achieving significant goals often requires giving up certain things, whether it's your time, certain habits, or even certain relationships.
Sacrifices. That's a tough one sometimes.
It can be. The fourth rule advocates for taking consistent small steps rather than attempting overwhelming leaps. The book stresses the value of having a well-thought-out plan and actively tracking your progress, perhaps in a journal.
Small steps. Tracking progress. Makes sense.
And the final crucial rule is that consistent repetition is absolutely key, emphasizing the necessity of persistent practice, even when it feels frustrating or monotonous, using the relatable example of learning a new language like Spanish.
Right. Practice makes perfect. Or at least better.
These 5 roles really underscore the critical importance of maintaining focus, taking consistent action, cultivating a strong sense of self-belief, and committing to that ongoing process of continuous improvement in order to truly cultivate a winner's mindset.
Now, achieving those significant goals requires sustained effort, and the book delves into this crucial aspect of learning to actually fall in love with the process itself. Why is finding enjoyment in the journey so important for long-term success?
Because relying solely on sheer willpower and determination for long-term success is often unsustainable and can very easily lead to burnout.
Burnout, yeah.
The book draws an interesting parallel to animal training, using the example of Pavlov's dogs to illustrate the power of association, consciously pairing difficult or challenging tasks with positive feelings to gradually make them more enjoyable over time.
Like classical conditioning for your work habits.
Kind of, yeah. It provides some really practical examples of how we can start to form these positive associations, like allowing yourself to enjoy a favorite healthy snack or drink while you're working, listening to motivational content,
Okay.
or even rewarding yourself in some small way after each focused work session.
These seemingly small techniques can actually help train your brain to link those effortful tasks with positive emotions. Consistent repetition helps to make the required actions more automatic and less of an internal struggle. The book also discusses the powerful technique of consciously associating your success with your own evolving identity, vividly envisioning the kind of person you will become once you've achieved your goals.
And it even suggests cultivating a sense of gratitude for the very opportunity to improve and grow, and perhaps using a simple visual reward system, like giving yourself gold stars for completed tasks to reinforce your progress.
Gold stars. I like it.
Exactly. The book also explores how we can actually learn to leverage our negative emotions and channel them into positive change. For example, learning to channel feelings of anger into productive activities like exercise.
Interesting.
Using envy as a signal of our own desires and a motivator to work towards them, and using anxiety as a foundation for taking proactive steps to prepare for potential challenges.
It even delves into how sadness and despair, while difficult, can sometimes lead to valuable self-reflection and clarity, and how we can learn to differentiate between healthy guilt and detrimental shame, offering Brené Brown's helpful steps for letting go of shame.
This really holistic approach to embracing the entire process, including understanding and working with our emotional responses, is absolutely key to maintaining sustained motivation and effectively preventing burnout in the long run.
Now, to help keep our expectations realistic and grounded, the book introduces the Pareto Principle and Sturgeon's Law. What are these principles and how can they help us in the context of self-discipline?
Right. The Pareto Principle, often referred to as the 80-20 rule, suggests that roughly 80% of your results tend to come from about 20% of your efforts.
The 80-20 rule, yeah.
And Sturgeon's Law is a bit more blunt, famously stating that 90% of everything is crud.
90% is crud.
Yeah.
That sounds pessimistic.
It can sound that way, but how do these seemingly somewhat pessimistic laws actually help us when we're trying to build self-discipline?
Good question.
Well, they provide a more realistic perspective on the relationship between our effort and the resulting outcomes. It's actually quite normal to invest significant time and energy into projects where the final output might not perfectly reflect that initial investment.
Okay.
Accepting this reality can actually foster greater discipline by helping to reduce frustration and encouraging us to focus our energy on the efforts that tend to yield the most significant results.
Focus on the 20% that matters.
Exactly. The book also touches on the importance of developing a degree of emotional detachment so that we can objectively assess what's working and, perhaps even more importantly, recognize when it might be necessary to pivot or even abandon a project that isn't yielding the desired results, rather than being driven solely by our initial passion.
It's about being more pragmatic in our approach and learning from our experiences rather than just being solely driven by our initial enthusiasm. Finally, the book addresses a really critical aspect of maintaining long-term self-discipline, actively avoiding burnout. What are the key signs of burnout, and what practical steps can we take to prevent it?
Burnout is a state of profound physical and mental exhaustion that can lead to a consistently low mood, an inability to make decisions, and a general sense of hopelessness.
Hmm.
It's important to distinguish it from normal stress or temporary brain freeze in its severity and the extended time typically required for full recovery.
Well, it's more serious.
Definitely. The book emphasizes that burnout doesn't usually happen suddenly, and that it can be effectively prevented by consciously paying attention to our overall well-being and setting healthy limits on our self-discipline.
It really stresses the importance of learning to say no to tasks that feel particularly draining, making sure we maintain a healthy daily routine with sufficient sleep, proper hydration, and a balanced diet,
All crucial.
and actively engaging in relaxation techniques that truly allow us to disconnect from work-related thoughts.
The book also highlights that our internal thought process surrounding our workload is crucial. Viewing our work primarily as a heavy burden significantly increases our risk of experiencing burnout.
So mindset matters here too.
Absolutely. It advocates for applying self-discipline not just to our tasks, but also to how we manage our workload by proactively avoiding distractions and procrastination, and by setting realistic timelines for our projects right from the start.
Okay.
Seeking advice if we're unsure about how long something might take, and factoring in potential delays.
And for those who might already be experiencing the signs of burnout, the book advises taking adequate time off to fully recover, potentially a week or even two, proactively informing employers or clients as needed,
Right.
and using that recovery period for honest self-reflection to identify the underlying triggers and develop effective strategies for preventing future burnout. It really emphasizes that experiencing burnout is a sign to change your approach, not a sign of personal failure.
That's such an important message. It's all about finding a sustainable rhythm for our self-discipline and recognizing the absolute necessity of adequate rest and recovery as part of that overall process.
Well, huge congratulations to you for sticking with us through this deep dive into the power of self-discipline. That in itself is a real testament to your own commitment to learning and personal growth.
Absolutely. As we've explored, self-discipline isn't some innate fixed trait, but rather a skill, a muscle that consistently grows stronger the more we choose to use it.
Mhm.
And remember, often the most significant transformations begin with those small, consistent steps.
And as the wise Jim Rohn so aptly put it, you must take personal responsibility. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself.
So even if your current situation feels particularly challenging, try to view it as the starting point for your own remarkable growth, much like the often humble beginnings of so many successful individuals throughout history.
Yeah.
Remember that consistently practicing those good habits will eventually lead to you operating at your optimal level, almost on autopilot.
And ultimately, the core message of the book really shines through. Self-discipline is truly the ultimate key to unlocking your full potential, perhaps even more so than any innate talent you might possess.
So I'll leave you with this thought.
All right.
Your personal journey toward greater self-discipline and the pursuit of your unique purpose has the potential to create positive ripples that extend far beyond your own life in ways you might not even imagine yet.
Wow.
Embrace the principles we've discussed today. Take that first step towards action and embark on what could be a truly radical transformation of your life.